So welcome to our Digital Health Advocacy Seminar. Before I hand over to the moderator, I would like to say a few words about United Europe. United Europe is a non-profit organization founded in 2013. United Europe does not represent any individual political or corporate interests and is financed exclusively by membership fees and donations. United Europe attempts to reawaken the enthusiasm and foresightfulness of the European Union by convening leading experts to collectively find solutions for today's most pressing issues. If you are interested in becoming a member or supporting us, please visit United Europe's website for more information on our memberships. I would like to give a special thanks to our advocate, Dr. Anne Latz, who is also here on the panel. Dr. Anne Latz is a part of our advocacy network and has been vital in putting this event together. The discussion will be followed by a Q&A, so please do post your questions into the chat. And now, with no further ado, I would like to hand over to our moderator, Sven Jungmann, founder and CEO at Founders Lane, who will lead us to the discussion.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Daria. Not CEO, CMO, also not founder, but partner, but it doesn't really matter. We have an excellent panel here today of people with different angles on the topic that touches us all. It's actually a set of topics, one being, in a way, the future of health. Intentionally not saying healthcare, and you will probably soon find out why. The second part being the role of Europe in all of this as an innovation ecosystem. Where do we stand here? And as many of you might know, is that Germany in 2019 has decided to pass a new law, which is first of its kind, essentially, that enables the reimbursement of health apps if they meet certain criteria. And they have hailed themselves also in the Harvard Business Review and so on as, this is the place to look to the future of healthcare. France is now following suit, thinking about a similar law. And other countries are also in discussion, which now raises the question of, are there synergies to harness if these things come together? What's the role of Europe in all of it? And is it really the place to look for if you look for the future of healthcare? So I'm really delighted to discuss these things, first and foremost with our speakers. And then we will have a good chunk of time to also engage all of you, hear your thoughts, and discuss it all together. So let's start with a brief round of introduction so that you know who's actually talking today. And I would like to hand over to Anand first.
Thanks, Sven. My name is Anand. I'm a researcher at the University of Heidelberg, the Heidelberg Institute of Global Health, as well as the University of Oxford. And I work on social determinants and healthcare systems. And my exposure to digital health in Germany and to DiGA, I guess, really started with Sven and Anna, working with Ali and on their digital health application.
Thank you. You'll hear, I know Anand for quite a while, a very interesting character, interested in a lot of different things, and always in depth. And it's one of the type of people that are truly needed what's coming up, because we more and more realize as a scientific community how much these things are interwebbed and how many things influence our health. So look forward to some very interesting perspectives. Next to Anand on my screen now is Anna.
Yes. Yeah. Good evening, everybody. My name is Anna. I'm a medical doctor from Germany. Also have a background in business administration. I've worked in the public and private sector and as a real doctor in patient care. Then I left the bedside and have been in the world of digital health for almost 3 years now. Currently, I'm the co-founder and CMO, like Sven, the medical officer of Hello Inside, which is a scientific self-care startup based in Vienna and Cologne. And we are using next generation biosensors like the continuous glucose monitor. And I've been very aware of and working with creating evidence around digital therapeutics and digital applications in the last years, and super happy to join the panel today.
Thank you, Anna. Laura, how about you?
Yes. Good evening, everyone. I'm Laura. I'm a Senior Insights Manager at Flying Health. We work with corporates and startups on anything related to next generation healthcare. And I personally work a lot on market access questions for digital health startups, especially in Germany, but also more and more across Europe. And so that's why I've been basically every single day thinking about the whole DiGA fast track that Sven just mentioned. And I think it's important to have this discussion about how to do this in Europe, because I remember prior to the Digital Care Act, the law that made this possible for startups in Germany, a lot of the companies, a lot of the startups I was talking to, they were on the verge of leaving Germany, of leaving Europe altogether, basically, because they couldn't really access the market. And then the DVG came, a reimbursement path came, and they've stayed. And I think that it shows how it's really necessary to create these opportunities across Europe for companies to make sure that the innovations that come from here, that all these companies have thought of, actually benefit the patients here as well. And I'm looking forward to discussing how that can be possible across Europe.
Thanks, Laura. Edouard.
Thanks a lot. I'm really happy to be here, obviously. My name is Edouard, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of TILAC Healthcare. I don't come from the healthcare industry myself originally. For 10 years, I've been producing mobile video games at a leading mobile game publisher called Gameloft, and I've witnessed front row how video games can be an incredible tool to engage users. And in 2016, I met with Professor José Alancel, who is the head of the ophthalmology department at University of Pittsburgh in the US, and also the director of the Vision Institute here in Paris. And he was looking for a way to monitor some of his patients affected by eye disease of aging, like AMD or diabetic retinopathy. And the issues he had was that with the digital tools that he was using, is that they were not reliable enough on one side because of mobile technology fragmentation, and that users were not engaged. And so we decided to change that by creating the first clinically validated medical mobile game to monitor vision. And so in short, at TILAC, we're leveraging on that power of retention that I talked about to create clinically validated medical mobile games to help monitor and rehabilitate patients affected by chronic diseases. And our first mobile game, Odyssite, is now deployed in France and Europe and in the US. It's been used since now 2019, approximately, by more than 250 ophthalmology centers in France. And I'm super happy to obviously join that, the panel today, because I think that reimbursement pathways are incredibly important for tools like us and for digital tools that are deciding to go in the prescribed model, and I think that Europe can play a big role in in the adoption of those solutions looking forward. So super happy to be here.
Nice, thanks. It's exciting to have the French voice as well. DiGA, somebody else I should introduce in the audience so far? No.
No, just the panelists for now.
But everybody, please feel free to connect also. I think there's an interesting group of people looking over it. I recognize some names. Maybe leaving Europe out for a second and just looking at maybe the problem and solution space. I mean, we all know, most of the areas in which digital therapeutics and also digital apps, health apps have been implemented is a lot around mental health. There's some stuff around maybe nutrition. You can find tinnitus was actually the most prescribed app in Germany so far. At least that's current state from a couple of months ago. But also, if you look forward a little bit, if you like, or you can look back. But what are the things where you see the biggest opportunity for everything around what could be a DiGA? Or maybe some of you even say we shouldn't focus on DiGA at all, and there's something else that's more important. Would be interesting to get your views. Anna, would you maybe give it a hack first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think you gave a good overview already. I mean, we use the word DiGA a lot. Maybe I should just say two sentences around it for all the people who are not in the field for so long. I mean, in Germany, since end of 2019, there was a law passed, and 2020, finally, the whole process around DiGA started, which gave us the chance to have reimbursable digital apps. So there was a process set up from the Federal Institute that's responsible for pharmaceuticals and medical devices, where companies, mostly startups and young companies, can just go through a process, which is not an easy one, and can be really evaluated, have to show some evidence and create evidence, and then can be listed as a DiGA. And they can be really prescribed by doctors, and that's actually how it's supposed to work. And as you already mentioned and put together, the first things we saw happening were coming really from the psychological health. There were a lot of startups already on the market which profited from their user base, their patient base they already have, to really generate evidence quickly. So I think that was kind of the first wave where we saw really a trend of those fields coming in, mental health being a big topic, not only from the rising numbers, but also from the innovative side. So by now, correct me if I'm wrong, we have 28 DiGAs listed. So that was quite a slower start than expected, but now it's really rising numbers. And I would say every 2 weeks, we are seeing new companies being able to be listed there, and the diversity also increases. So we have from musculoskeletal to as you said, tinnitus, to like non-smoking apps, adipositas. So a lot of different things coming up there, so I would say it's hard to really see the next trend and indications coming. But what's super important, of course, it's that it's really all made for the patients. So really in Germany, it's for all the people who have the statutory health insurance. They are granted access by law now that the doctors should prescribe those apps to them. So it's over 70 million people. And I think that's one very important path and aspect we could focus on, the patient aspect. So who are those solutions designed for? Are they really designed as expected? Because we're coming from a startup perspective, we could also say, is there a fit really in what has been designed and put on the market? Is it really used? I think there are some interesting aspects to that.
So Anand, from a systems perspective, we're now, I mean, a lot of efforts are being put into this, right? There's regulators who need to get updated, people getting staffed on the roles of, seeing what gets admitted, what not, startups adjusting themselves to this, etc., etc. And then also the reimbursement at the end of the day, doctors needing to learn how to do it, patients spending time to use the apps and so on. What's your view on this? Is that a good thing? Do we have enough evidence to support this approach, or where would you, if you were the Minister of Health of Germany or now France, or if you were advising them, what would you suggest for them to look into before they decide on a law like that?
A very important question. I mean, I suppose as a starting point, if we're looking at it from a European perspective, one of the unique features of Europe is that every country has a universal healthcare system. And that's one of the wonderful features as well. And as a starting point, 2 constraints of any universal healthcare system. 1 is that you provide care to the entire population. And 2, you do so within a finite budget. Now that second constraint, needing to do so within a finite budget, means that you can say yes to certain things, but it also means you have to make really, really tough decisions about what you say no to, because you can't pay for everything. And so from that perspective, and it kind of alluding to the point that you made earlier on around, what role DiGAs play, like any pharmaceutical or diagnostic, DiGA is a means to an end. They're an intervention type. And I think what we need to focus on as a community is what are the ends that we actually want to achieve. And to Anna's point, looking at the needs within the population and the needs for patients, I think is a starting point. And again, just looking at first principles, if you look at the needs within the European populations generally, about 70% of healthcare expenditure is for non-communicable diseases, many of which have their basis in lifestyle related. factors. And so if I was to put my money in this, looking at the sustainability of healthcare systems, considering the aging demographic and the aging population, where I would put my money is trying to promote health and prevent disease generally. And DiGA, I think, has a role to play in that, but I think there's probably a lot of other interventions and modalities of interventions that we can probably engage in and support to actually do a really good job of trying to ensure that our populations are healthy and that we move this back instead of having to spend 70% of our healthcare budget on non-communicable diseases, most of which are lifestyle based and can be brought into remission. You know, can we reduce that to, over the next 10 years, say 60% of our budget, and then 50% of our budget, and then 40% of our budget, and free up some of the resources to actually reinvest in other areas where we absolutely need to reinvest. And something that you and I have spoken about before is the education sector, preparing our future generations for, firstly, this massive burden of COVID-19 related spending on tests and vaccines, et cetera, as well as preparing for climate change, because we really don't know what the hell we're doing on this front, and the future generations don't know what to expect either. So, you know, again, going back to first principles, have to provide care to the entire population. We have to do so within a finite budget. Where is our money best spent? I would say it's to promote health, reduce disease, then reallocate that budget to the areas that we really need to. Our infrastructure is collapsing in some, you know, some countries, et cetera. Yeah, anyways, I'll stop rambling there.
No, that's very helpful. I think, so my observation is that often that, especially with the recent lawmaking, it's all about, we want to drive digital, which is laudable, which is nice. But like you said, to what end? Is there an overarching strategy other than let's use new tools? And this is indeed something that I've seen a bit lacking. I think intentionally they wanted to keep it open because they thought, okay, let's leave that to the market. But if you're already sort of, I mean, essentially what the Digital Care Act is doing is prioritizing one type of technology, which are apps. And as we discussed earlier, you know, what about bioengineering? What about developing hardware sensors, you know, and all of that? Or also what about education, et cetera? Are we sort of biasing ourselves towards one tool? And if we're doing so, might there be a value in really thinking about, okay, but what is the overarching mission here? And that's probably something that's lacking. And so it's left to the market, which is fine. But maybe that could be a question for Laura or Edouard. I'm not sure. Feel free.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that maybe we need to get back to that question, which is what can we expect with digital in general for the healthcare system. Like, I think that I think that DiGA is for apps for one main reason is that maybe in the heads of the conceptor, it was, you know, kind of logical that apps will reach out to more volume and eventually you will see more impact because you're going to have more patients that are basically downloading the apps, and eventually you're going to have, you know, like it's going to have a massive impact for the healthcare system. But the reality, and this is what interests me as, you know, like an app provider or an app manufacturer, is like, how do we make sure that digital deliver its promise? And the reality is that it's much harder than what it looks like. First and foremost, you need to make sure that your apps are engaging users over a long period of time. Retention is key, and there's no standards for digital health application right now about, you know, retention and usage. And I think it's something that needs to be taken into account a lot, because if you look at most of the apps right now that are on the App Store and digital health apps, they have really poor retention. And second, which I think is something that, I mean, I'm not an expert. I mean, I'm obviously not from Germany, so I'm not an expert on DiGA, but one thing that I've heard about, and it's very similar in France, is that physician adoption is key, all right, to obviously prescribe. And I think that beginning of 2021, only 53% of the physicians in Germany were aware of what DiGA was. And it's very similar to what we see in France. Like, if we want our app to be working, you need to make sure that, you know, like, it inserts I mean, they insert in the physician's workflow. And in order to do that, you need to spend the money where, you know, like to basically put the budget in order to make sure that you kind of somehow incentivize doctor to change their habit to include digital in their workflow. And it's something that we see in our case. We have really good retention, like after a year on an average population that is 72-year-old, we still have 35% of our users that are coming back on average every 2 to 3 days. So that's good. But on the other side, we're still, you know, like, we don't have like digital traction as we're relying on prescribers. I think that it's important that the way we envision DiGA-like reimbursement pathway does take into account the fact that it's going to take a long time to have adoption. And it's something that, in my opinion, is very important.
Maybe to just add on your points, Edouard, I think for in terms of the physician, I absolutely agree that that's sort of the big gatekeeper right now in Germany to drive adoption for the DiGA. And I think, as you were saying, sort of making sure that they might change their workflows. I think it's also a lot about making sure that your application sort of fits as best as possible within their workflow so that they don't have to change as much, and maybe not just viewing the user experience from the patient side, even though, as Anand mentioned, the DiGA is very, very patient-centric, but also making sure that the user experience for the provider, for the doctor, is actually just as good, maybe in what kind of data they can get out of it that the patient can share with them, if that is sort of done in a way, made available in a way that is perfect for the provider, that they can actually use it and do something with it and get actionable insights. So that's maybe one way. And then in terms of retention, I think the DiGA, and I don't believe any of them are currently have done that, but I think there is an opportunity to use that for reimbursement mechanisms, the retention rate, because technically, I mean, you as the DiGA provider, you have the data, you know how often it is being used, you can really track adherence, you can really track retention. So technically, I think there could be an opportunity to have pay for performance elements that use exactly that. And that probably is something that will be interesting for the payers as well, since they often complain about the high prices, but maybe if you show them that this is actually being used and is working, that could also be an argument for them to pay for it.
Thank you. And so one of the questions in the title of all of our calendar invite is, could the German DiGA become a role model for Europe when it comes to, you know, putting Europe on the fast track for digital health applications? It would be great to hear, because everybody here has different experiences, and it's nice probably also to start this round of answers with Anne, who has been at the forefront of going through the BfArM application, of, you know, designing a clinical trial, of the whole process, and would be nice to hear maybe some of your reflections and learnings, what could be done. Let's assume even maybe, you know, the law might be great and we might have a good end towards what it strives to, but if you look at the implementation of it, you know, are there things on that front that you think maybe should be different, or, yeah, whatever comes to your mind would be really, really precious to hear.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, super happy to share some practical insights. And also, I think it kind of puts together a lot of points we heard today already. Because to answer the question, could it become a role model? I would say yes, if we really learn from it and not try to do the same, like copy it, put it into another system and build the same, go through the same steps. I mean, as I was already mentioned when I started it, the whole process and the whole setup of the first DiGA, I think it took much longer than initially expected. And the adoption rates, and as already stated correctly, retention rates are super low, although going up, but still all the fears of exploding costs had not been matched yet. So one problem I see, and I think this could be solved if we are more proactive now in the whole setting up and trying to implement it into different countries, is exactly what you said, Sven, of like, there's innovations going on in a much higher speed. So there are new kind of sensors, medical devices. So all that is still happening, and we are trying to meet it with like regulatory aspects. So the process also needs to evolve. And this is really, really hard, because the first problem was of the people who were at the Federal Institute to trying to evaluate these digital apps, which are medical devices, but still they are digital solutions, which per se, as you know from all the FTUs, are changing on a maybe monthly basis and improved. And this was like the first really conflict we saw. Okay, what is you send in and show the people there? How, on which basis can they evaluate it? Where's the room for you being able as a company, as an app, to improve, to match the needs of the patients and the providers? And this is something I see not solved yet, but I think it could be solved if we really create some standards how we evaluate those apps and solutions. So I think this is one very crucial aspect, because if we do not pick up speed in this, we are always like running behind, and the innovation is happening, and we still do not have a new standard on how to look at that. And then, of course, something which is a genuine problem of different countries, but it's not so easy as well, is to like use different solutions in different languages for different patients. It's super hard to, even if the technology would allow it to, and maybe even the reimbursement system, to bring it into another country. It's just not a copy and paste system. And so from this is also some really small challenges we observed a lot. And all those things should be really more proactively be discussed and also shared, to give like a best practice examples of the first DiGAs. I mean, we did that. We had the Health Innovation Hub in Germany until end of last year. There was the effort to really build this European perspective on it, and I think that was already a good start to really share different. And from Eduard talking, I hear that the problems are everywhere the same, but these are a few aspects I really learned. And of course, I mean, we touched about it a lot. The digital literacy is really something I'm very much concerned about as well, because it's not only in Germany, it's quite low, and we're not talking about the patients only, but especially those who are about to use and prescribe it. And if we do not find solutions to really strengthen literacy, digital literacy, for example, in the educational system of doctors or other care providers, then we really will have probably a bunch of really nice solutions, but not really getting them where they are supposed to really impact and make the change. And as Anand said, we have a lot of prevention potential, which could be via digital, but also other solutions. And if we are not careful here, then we just create another digital divide and do not really win anything.
Yeah, I totally agree. Is there actually, I think this is a nice one also for the audience. Is there somebody who has an opinion or an experience that they would like to share on this? It's worth a try.
No, I can actually jump in and just weigh in, you know, like, and I can basically, I totally agree with Anne. I mean, one mistake, in my opinion, that we're currently making in France is that everybody's saying, oh, we need to do DiGA in France. And I'm like, yeah, we need to do DiGA because the mindset is great. And I think that it's potentially the first, like, you know, national scale movement to try to have, you know, like to try to foster digital innovation in the healthcare system, but we need to learn from it. And in France, for example, prior to DiGA, we had something that was called Programme Étape, which was, you know, like to subsidize somehow digital innovation and the reorganization that it was actually implying inside the physician's workflow. It was very interesting because you could basically apply and say, okay, I want to introduce this new app. I think that will change that way the physician's workflow, and I think that it's going to do that medical benefit. And then eventually you would get like kind of a budget, and you would do an experimentation on a given number of patients. And now we're basically switching to a one-size-fits-all type of type of reimbursement, where all the telemonitoring, for example, tools are going to have the same pricing almost, no matter what the disease is, no matter what the medical outcome is, and with very limited incentivization on the physician's side. And I think that's something that, you know, like is in my opinion, a mistake. We should basically take what we've learned, I mean, what we're learning right now from Germany, and make it better, and kind of try to have like a European model using all the different experimentation that we've done in order to build something that is sustainable. Because otherwise, if there is no adoption, then eventually you don't have enough data to prove that there is medical benefit to use digital in the system, and eventually it's not going to work. That's as simple as that.
Laura, any additions from you, or?
I mean, maybe on the European system there, I think it's as Anna said, as Edouard just said, having the opportunity to collect data all across Europe will probably be especially important in maybe very small indications where we have a very limited number of patients. So for that, it's going to be definitely an opportunity to collect evidence all across Europe. And for the larger indications where you can in one country probably collect a significant number of, or recruit a significant number of participants, it's going to be crucial that this kind of data will be accepted in all the other European countries, to just facilitate the access, to also make it feasible for the manufacturers of DiGA to actually bring their solution to different countries, to allow also smaller markets in Europe to benefit from these, because the DiGA manufacturers don't have to go through over 20 different systems, but they can actually go for one. And I think what was nice, what the Health Innovation Hub at the very end of their term sort of introduced, was to look at this whole DiGA process in various steps and think about which parts of it can be harmonized across Europe and which maybe can't. And I think their suggestion was sort of to have the whole access part, so making sure that we have a common definition, common criteria, common evidence standards, available across all countries. And then when it comes to reimbursement mechanisms, pricing negotiations, maybe keeping that more on a national level, since these systems are very, very different. And it's probably going to be a step too far ahead to think about how we can harmonize the entire process if we want to get this done quickly. So I think it's worth thinking about it in different steps there.
Anand, did you also want to join in, or?
Yeah, really interesting to hear fellow panelists' reflections on this. I mean, I suppose from my side, the thing I think about is, can we, kind of alluding to the question you originally posed, Sven, maybe my interpretation of it, can we see DiGA as like a paradigm shift, for example, in healthcare systems? For DiGA, no, I don't think so, because it's just a means to an end. It's a modality of intervention. It's like a pharmaceutical intervention, for example. That's my opinion. But I think where the prospect for a paradigm shift does come in is the points that Laura was making around data. So if you think back historically, Germany has actually served as sort of a paradigm shifter, because socialized medicine actually originated and was born in Germany, right, with Bismarck. Now that model wasn't adopted across the board, right? So the beverage systems in UK and Italy and Spain are different categorically, but the ethos is the same. And Bismarck started socialized medicine as a means of tackling the need that he saw within his population, which was really, really poor health for the workers at the cusp of the Industrial Revolution, or during the Industrial Revolution. And if we're looking at DiGA, then maybe DiGA is not, but I think what DiGA starts us on the route or the path towards is actually collecting data in a different way and leveraging and utilizing data in a different way. And also sort of touching on the point that you made earlier, looking at bioengineering, look at sensors, looking at wearables, all of these other different devices, which will collect data in different ways and also collect different types of data that we never had access to before. So I don't think DiGA is a paradigm shift, but I do think treating data differently is definitely a paradigm shift for healthcare systems, because traditionally we've just focused on clinical metrics and objective clinical metrics that would be derived from, the sort of empirical model of medicine, looking at diagnostic tests, etc. So, I think this could be seen as a seed. And I think, again, to your point, if this can be used as a seed to establish some general principles on how data can be collected and leveraged, potentially maybe reimbursement models can't be shared, but I think data collection models can be shared across European borders. I know that it's controversial, but I think if we were able to do that, and leveraging some of the provisions within the DiGA clause itself, which looks at making some of that data available to researchers, I think is an important and brave step in actually helping us to understand better how to support our populations to improve their health, to tackle disease, as well as better design modalities for these different types of interventions. For that, I think DiGA can be seen as an important seed, just like the Bismarckian regulations on bringing in socialized medicine. It evolved and adapted, but the general principles were still there. So I don't know, I'll just kind of reflecting and leveraging what other panelists were also saying.
Great. I mean, so listening to you, it also makes me think of another type of maybe paradigm shift or committing to a certain paradigm after a while, is that in the very beginning, and I remember our early conversations in sort of the beginning of 2019, even like public documentations from the German Ministry of Health were strongly advocating a digital exceptionalism, whereby they said, oh, we don't need the same level of evidence for digital interventions as we would expect for other types of interventions, such as, for example, pharmaceuticals, because the value of data is so much more and nothing, what could happen anyway, sort of thing. And quite quickly, and they try to hide it a little bit afterwards, but obviously we're in a democracy, so you can't just make official documents disappear, so you can still read it. But we marveled at it and we thought, well, how is this possible, right? How can you write something like that? And it doesn't come as a big surprise that the medical community, the doctors all said, guys, I'm not here to prescribe stuff that's not evidence-based. If you claim that it has an effect, it will also have side effects. And even if it doesn't have side effects, it costs money and people's time. So we have to be cautious about what we do. And the insurance companies said, guys, why are we now supposed to pay for something where there's no evidence? And then suddenly the pendulum swung a little bit in the other direction, which is something that Anna also experienced, where then they changed the rules halfway through and expected a lot of pre-studies already that you had no chance of having if you weren't pre-informed, because these things take time, right? So there was a lot of calibration needed, and in the end of the day, what they did, on my view, is they made clear, okay, now actually we're committing to the notion that even digital solutions need evidence. And that sounds trivial, but quite obviously it was not until for quite a while, until this became a public matter and where suddenly people were supposed to act on it and put money on it. I thought that was also interesting, but thanks for all of these viewpoints. I noticed some things that we discussed and that we always, most of the statements were measured against sort of Europe as the wider context, which makes sense because the other part of our title for today is Europe on the fast track for digital health applications. But I would like to invite everybody to zoom out for a second and adopt sort of a wider view. And maybe we can do that with an anecdote or two anecdotes. So I was recently helping a startup in fundraising, and I spoke to a lot of German investors and sort of European investors, and good conversations mostly. But then I also spoke to people from England or from the US, and it felt like, the connecting the dots game. We have these dots as a child, and then you see a picture. So they wouldn't say it into my face, but the questions they would ask, if I put them together, I could see the overarching question, and it always was, if you are so great, if this is such a great startup, why are they in Germany? Or why are they in Europe, right? Why don't you go right away to England or to the US? What are you doing there? You're wasting your time. And another friend of mine, also a very seasoned angel and VC investor, he once said to me, I only look at double-digit billion opportunities. Everything else is a waste of time, which is why I have almost zero investments in Europe, because they all think too small. They always look as a reference point to their own country. And DiGA doesn't help, right? Because DiGA helps you to overfit or incentivizes startups to overfit their solution, so the argument goes, to an 80 million population, which sounds great, but if you then look at, if you do hypertension, then it's, Anand, you know the numbers better than me, I'm sure, but it's only a fraction of the population, even if it's a big disease. And of those, you can only reach a few. So you're never even going to get close to any of what these international investors might be expecting. And even if Europe now joins forces, it still is kind of a small, it's becoming big, but it's still fractioned. Even the European single market is not doing enough in many ways for a startup to scale so much. If you look at Dr. Lib, who were really successful with near zero marketing in France, they're struggling in Germany with a big marketing budget that they had to install, especially for Germany, because otherwise they wouldn't have succeeded. So as we all said, these are individual separate markets, even if we have a single market concept, because reimbursement is different, like Edouard said in the beginning, because the workflows are different, like most of you mentioned. So if we zoom out, what's the right thing to do for Europe if it wants to move, assuming that it wants that, beyond its Eurocentric view and give rise to innovations that become relevant beyond our European borders?
I don't have a response, but I just have a question for you, Sven. Because I know you've done some work in Asia as well. I don't have much context there, but what is the mindset in Asia?
So I think what people tell me often is that they say, guys, you are so arrogant, you know? You think you are debating back and forth all your human rights values and how the future should look and get the multitude of opinions in there and ban this and ban that. In the meantime, we're all busy building the technology of tomorrow, which we know you will adopt anyway, because you will need it, because you will see the value of it. And then it's our game, right? It's not yours anymore. So please keep doing what you're doing. It only serves us. And they still appreciate, you know, sort of the quality that's been built here, mostly branded by European car makers or whatever else it is. But they see us losing the game because we spend too much time debating and taking abundant holidays. I was even helping a Russian startup team to set up shop in Germany, and they got an institutional investor, sent them some documents about their startup and the technology that they have, and then the Germans, you know, they said, oh, we can only answer in 2 weeks because now we have holidays. Oh, and there's a bank holiday, and there's this and there's this. And the Russians got so nervous. They called me all the time. They must be copying what we're doing. I'm sure I'm like, no. Actually, I'm sure they're at Lake Garda, busy getting a sunburn or something like that. Don't worry. No. They take too long. And it's sort of a complete mindset shift where I don't know, they feel we're resting too much and discussing too much and not acting enough. My view. But please, anybody, feel free to object if you have different viewpoints.
I think it's so true what you just said. I'll be frank and honest. I think that healthcare more than maybe, Anand, I know you know a bit about education, but maybe it's a bit similar in education market. But healthcare for me is an international market in the sense that the notion of nation is extremely important. And unfortunately, I don't see how Europe can uniformize in a very near future the entire healthcare market. And so until then, the US with a 270 million, highly technological healthcare market is still paving the way, in my opinion. And so to your point, why shouldn't we go to the US? Well, it's mostly a matter of resources most of the time. To be honest, and then competition. It's better sometimes to be king of your own market than to be lost in the wild with limited resources. But you're right. This is basically the elephant. I've seen the comment. This is exactly the elephant in the room today. I mean, in our special case, the anti-VEGF market in ophthalmology, which is exactly what we are optimizing, is like 56% of the market is in the US, of the global market is in the US. So, I mean, like, there's no doubt we need to go to the US. The question is when and how. And honestly, any European startups that is telling you, I prefer to stay in Europe because it's my own local market, and I feel that it's because they are not yet ready for to play with the grown-ups somehow.
Yeah, I can also give quite recent example, just stressing the difficulty we have here. So my startup is based in Austria and Germany, and even that is not easy. But we are currently looking into different studies, and I have a huge interest to really set up a more international study, remote study, like sheer online study in a, I would say, European context. And until I'm figuring out, and we are figuring out how to do that, how we can even get different consents from different participants in different countries with their obligations and all the protectionisms. There was just recently from the FDA in the US that they just released a guideline on how to remotely acquire data for clinical investigations. So there have been very good examples. I mean, Apple has been doing it for a while, also doing all these online studies, and they even moved forward. They really brought out just some guidelines, and this is what I also stressed a little bit earlier. We are always a little bit trying to be so good at it and really overfitting, as Sven said, and really trying to match all the criteria and be perfect at it. Then we move forward. And yeah, this can be very, very frustrating. And I think it's on a personal level what a lot of players in the market experience. And this is exactly what should not happen. Like people getting innovators frustrated because of all the slow pace and not really daring enough.
And at the same time, I would say the US market is also not that easy, right, for any companies to go. And I feel like if you have a discussion around like this with people who are based in the US, they also have the question of how do I reach providers? How do I reach patients? How do I get the word out? How do I make sure I have codes for everything? How do I get reimbursement? I think a lot of them have also not really solved these questions and have solved that problem. And I think it very much depends if you're in a certain disease area where employers have a very big interest in maybe preventing a surgery using an MSK digital therapeutic. Of course, I think it's going to be easy for you to sell there, but I think there are actually a lot of areas where it's not that easy for you to sell there because there are also not these reimbursement structures in place. So I do still think that there's a need for having a European system, and maybe a system that is more based on the patient and on their needs, and implementing reimbursement structures for that, so that we don't just have very few disease areas where digital is the norm, maybe, but leave out a bunch of the rest.
My thoughts, I find this discussion very interesting. I don't have any, my stance on this is just one of confusion, to be honest. I don't know what would be the right answer for this, going based on first principles. So, I mean, these are the principles that were coming into mind, listening to you, Sven, and Edward, and Laura, and Anna. So E.F. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, the strapline of which the study of economics as if people mattered, and how monopolizing is actually not good for long-term sustainability and health of the market, which also ties into general principles of looking at ecosystems, where you actually want diversity, which means that you always have to have small inefficiencies within the system itself to provide that resilience over time. And then also just thinking about some of the craziness in the US, where just, I would say, stupid amounts of money are going into companies that have nothing. So they pour a lot of money, but that also leads to, you know, the trials that we just saw, the verdict of which, you know, came like 3 weeks ago, Theranos. I mean, you get all of these really brilliant, you know, bright individuals pouring stupid amounts of money into something that's just completely fake. The hype machine, I mean, the digital hype, and, you know, as you mentioned earlier, Sven, the digital exceptionalism is such that, you know, people just get super, super excited. I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, I guess it's somewhere in the middle. So if you overfit too much, then you become so constrained that you kill off any potential for innovation or even thinking outside the box. But at the same time, if you go to the kind of attitudes that you have in Silicon Valley, where everybody is like, oh yeah, that's going to be the greatest idea since sliced bread, and everybody's looking to create a unicorn that raises X billion in, you know, 5 seconds. I think that just leads to stupidity and danger and instability within the system as well. So I don't know what the right answer is, but these are just some reflections. I think sometimes looking at long-term resilience, you need to have the sort of inefficiencies in small entities that are actually coming to the fore to keep things moving, but it does have to be flexible. So I think that overfitting, I think, is definitely a problem. So how do you allow that flexibility without going crazy like you do in some instances in the US? I don't know. You guys probably have much more experience than I do, but I don't know, these are just general reflections.
Any more comments also from the audience on this topic? Because otherwise I have something else I'm really curious to hear your opinion on. I think Mariam is posting. Oh, I just realized that there's a chat where people wrote something. I'll catch up on these shortly, but I think Mariam just put something interesting up there. And so she's saying, if there's no way 27 markets with more than 20 languages and cultures compete with 270 million one language market, would a good mitigation be EU harmonization? And if so, what does it look like? If someone has an instant response to that, please shoot. Otherwise, I have another question that I would like to frame this in, but I'd like to give you the opportunity to answer to it. It's a bit of a deep question, so I'm not sure if you feel comfortable.
There was a harmonization to a certain extent with the currency, but I don't know whether one would consider that harmonization. And so that was achieved. Was it a success? I don't know, but it was achieved. Again, I have no answers. I'm sorry, I'm probably not being useful in terms of giving answers. Essentially just raising more questions. So I don't know, but there is an example of currency.
My 5 cents to this would be, I recently spoke to somebody at Row. Row is a company that does direct-to-consumer healthcare in the States. So you can have an online consultation and you get your medication sent to your home or a test sent to your home, etc. They've been named in the New York Times recently for being the only ones who were able to provide you with COVID tests in a very short amount of time in the comfort of your home. Although others ran out of supplies, and they're valued at 8 billion currently in a silent round. So quite a successful company. And in the US, so where you would say, great, we have one big country. But if you talk to the people who actually built this up, they will tell you a different story. They will tell you that sometimes you have state regulations, and I'm making up the states now, but where maybe you have a country, like a pharmacy at the border of Texas, and you want to deliver it into the neighboring state, it's only 10 minutes away, but you're legally not allowed to send the medication from Texas to a neighboring country. So they had to come up with all sorts of silly things with their stocks and so on to make these things happen. So sometimes what looks like something truly harmonized and easy, in fact, might not be. It's 50 different states, really. So you have a lot of these challenges too. But there's something to be said about language barriers and so on also.
No, that's true, but at the same time, you have integrated centers that are so big that, you know, like that it's also like, for example, if you manage to for example work with Kaiser Permanente or UPMC, then obviously you have access to an unfair amount of, you know, like patients that are, and where you can obviously express your technology much better than in most of the medical centers that you will see. In most, again, like I think in Europe you still have some good examples, but in the US it's much bigger. But I agree. I mean, I don't have an answer to the 27 countries. I think that it would be much easier if we would be a bit less countries and a bit less languages in general. But I don't have an answer and I think the only good example is the currency, and then the freedom to move from one country to another, which are the best example of what, you know, like Europe can, what Europe can do. Like we work from one country to another in a great way. And actually during COVID, what was interesting is that you had patients coming from Germany going to France to get, you know, like to get treated. And I think that's also something that is kind of interesting. Can we build upon that? That's really the question today, in my opinion. But it's more, I don't have like the operational answer to that big question.
Yes, please, Annette.
I presume that the Green New Deal could be a game changer, because there's a program, Next Generation EU, or many programs, and public health is embedded. So I presume within these projects, there will be some solutions for our topics.
One question maybe for everybody here, which I don't know the answer to, but touching on Annette's point about Green Deal, is there common EV infrastructure? Because I know, all of the countries are making this massive shift towards electric vehicles and charging stations. Is there some sort of harmonized regulations around EV? Yeah, I read recently that Mercedes has made a commitment that by 2030, they won't manufacture any combustion engines anymore. So this is sort of a complete shift in the marketplace towards EV. Are there harmonized regulations about EV?
It's not my topic, sorry. I really don't know.
DiGA, this is probably another nice workshop to organize then. It's something I would like to bring up, and so I used to do CrossFit a lot, which is this high intensity workout where every time you do something else, and there's this saying in this community, it never gets easy, you only get fitter. And it sounds very blunt, but over time you realize what it really means. And for example, I don't know, you might be practicing your pull-ups and you get stronger with it and it works, but you reach the point where suddenly you're not going to be able to do more pull-ups and you don't know why. Until you realize that the real problem is it's not your back strength or whatever, not your biceps, it's actually your grip strength. So then you spend some time just doing silly grip workouts, and then all of a sudden you can do a couple more because this became your weak point, right? This has become for me an analogy of a growth mindset in general. So I always try to figure out, okay, what's the weakest point now? And it's often something that only becomes visible once the other parts become quite strong. And so let's assume that the whole DiGA process and so Anand, even used the word of a paradigm shift, where he said a lot of things have been advanced, or we have seen that we need to commit to evidence-based digital health and we can't play exceptionalism. So I believe quite some things have been moved forward, maybe some things that we or the policymakers didn't expect at first on the back of this new regulation. But if you look at Europe, and if we take maybe again this sort of more international perspective going beyond Europe, and we want to position ourselves as the strong competitor, again, we can only get stronger ideally if we keep working on it. But what are the next growth areas? What are the things where what is the equivalent to the grip strength for the pull-ups that we need to invest more on now in order to leap forward? Do you have any thoughts on that from your experiences?
I think just after that, I think something also I touched upon in the very beginning is that prevention right now is not really being used in any of the healthcare systems I know of really as a priority. So I think really putting prevention as a priority can support the entire healthcare system of every single country. And I think that's not something that is being used either in the digital world, because for example, for DiGA, it's explicitly excluded prevention under that, which I think is a shame. And so focusing more on prevention, I think is something that can bring all of us really, really forward.
I'm obviously highly biased, as Sven will, and everybody in this audience, well, the panelists at least will maybe already know that, but I would say social determinants and prevention as Laura was mentioning. So social determinants looking at, employment, education, housing, access to transport, clean food, clean air, clean water. I think these are all the elements that actually determine 80% of our health outcomes. And so, in addition to looking at prevention, looking at some of these structural elements, I think is also essential. And I think digital can play a role in some of these sorts of things. I think, for example, taking things one level higher, can we look at smart cities and digitization at the smart city level, leveraging some of the stuff that Sven was talking about before, looking at wearables and sensors, air quality, temperature, looking at these sorts of things, water quality, looking at, the housing quality as well, and actually aggregating and collecting and leveraging this data to actually improve the opportunities for health within different populations, I think could be an extremely interesting shift in utilizing digital technology as a means to an end. And really, leveraging data in a different way, so we can actually drive evidence-based decision-making. I think that would be quite interesting and exciting. So, having these links between individuals and populations and cities and infrastructure, and looking and trying to create and understand the causal and correlative impacts between these different variables, I think would be hugely interesting.
Just to make this really clear, I'm not sure that everybody's familiar with this concept of social determinants of health, and you implicitly said it, but I think it's important to really spell it out. So not too long ago, actually, there has been this realization that maybe only 20% of our health outcomes, so how healthy we feel, how happy we are, what our quality of life is when we grow old, only 20% are determined by the healthcare system, by what doctors do, nurses do, therapists do, etc. Which at first is a bit embarrassing for us doctors, but it is reality. And so the other 80% are what are these social determinants of health. Everything from your job, your education, your maybe even income, your friends, the closest friends you have, etc. All of that. And we're not really putting a lever on this and try to do something with that until very recently. And it's quite still a nascent field of research in which Anand is extremely active in. And I spoke to the Chief Strategy Officer, I think is their title, of Bayer's G4A, which is an early stage investment vehicle. And they all focus on digital health. And she goes as far as to say, any healthcare investor who is not focusing at least parts of their sort of decision-making in their investments on social determinants of health is completely missing the point. They don't know what they're talking about. So she's probably equally biased as you are, Anand, from an investor perspective, because that's where we can probably move the most. But yeah. Sorry, I think somebody wanted to jump in. I don't know who it was.
Yeah, of course, that was me. Because talking about prevention, I definitely want to add my 5 cents here. I'm super happy we're bringing that up and also see really good potentials here, because just as you described, Sven, I mean, there has been some maturity now in the solutions, like talking about DiGA and care and how to really evaluate them and test them, and what is important when looking at digital solutions that really should help people and create some evidence. I mean, there has a lot been done in the last years, and I think we can definitely build up bringing it to prevention and really understanding that, because when we're in the field of prevention, we are very much closer to the wellness, lifestyle-y sector where everything gets a little bit blurry. And this is or another buzzword like consumer healthcare, where there's a lot of shift in the market. And I think that's really a good opportunity and also an obligation to really now make sure that if we bring up solutions in that field and make really prevention a little bit more sexy and maybe also more personalized, and that there we still need to have really evidence-based solutions that really have also some proof that they make a change. Because we've been around this other pandemic of metabolic diseases and obesity for quite some time, and this will even be accelerated now by the other pandemic that's currently happening. And so this is such a crucial area where, and there I completely agree with what Anand said, where we can really have digital as one means to an end, because this really brings solutions closer to the people. And I personally believe that in the field of prevention, we have maybe Edouard, you have some thoughts on that, where we really have higher retention rates in the solutions, where we really have more adherence. If we are closer to the field of like movements or food, etc., because these lifestyle areas really are blurring into it. And I could imagine that there's a big opportunity in that. But Edouard wants to add in. I'm happy to hear what you're saying.
No, but it's a really, really good topic, because the problem is true with retention, with prevention, sorry, is in my opinion retention. Because how do you make people, like that are unaware that there is risks, like kind of be, how can you create a routine to anticipate future risks, right? Most of the people. And this is where digital can actually separate even more people, meaning that you're going to have you're going to have healthy, wealthy, well-educated people that are going to go for prevention because they are aware of the risks, and then you're going to have like the rest of the people that are not going to do that because they have other concerns. And unfortunately, you create a two-tier system. So I think that it's extremely interesting, and you're all definitely right. But how do we make sure that, like, we kind of convey properly the right ideas regarding social determinants, and how do we make sure that prevention is, like, doesn't mean non-retention, and how do you make sure that, like, kind of patients are empower themselves somehow, and make sure that they take care of their health. I think it's a very interesting topic. Should we start with, the medical, the question is, should we start with the medical urgency to kind of show, okay, digital can save lives, but it can also save lives earlier, and then, like, kind of educate people, kind of a top-down approach, or should we have a more bottom-up approach? I don't have the answer here, but you're right. Retention and prevention, in my opinion, are going to be the next hot topic for digital health, in my opinion.
Oh, sorry. No, I'm talking only. So also in the chat, DiGA just posted it there, that we always, and 100% agree, like, this digital divide, I'm super afraid of that. And it's already there, but we do have to make sure it's not even growing and growing, because especially the new innovations are the more pricey ones. But that's a very blurry field, also the health and science communication, to talk to the people, to reach them and to reach the right people. And I'm also not seeing so many from a, mostly German perspective. I've worked for the Ministry of Health Education, and I've seen how hard it is to really bring out the right messages. And Anna knows a bunch more also about public campaigns, but this is all something that needs to be put into context, because one new app or 10 new apps or 100 new apps will not solve that. The Huberman Lab, yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, DiGA just mentioned that there's the very, very great podcast educational hub, the Huberman Lab. Yeah, we're working for that in Europe, I would say.
I'm curious. I've been stalking you all a little bit while people have been talking. We have a really interesting broad audience, people with different experiences. I'd be delighted if somebody has another impulse or a reaction to what has been said that they want to share from their perspective. Is there somebody who's keen on giving the gift of insights? Then I have a different topic also. What is something, if you were to invest or advise an investor now? So we think a lot of what we talked about right now was sort of more normative, right? We should be doing more prevention. We should have these and these goals. We should be effective in there. But if we ignore that for a moment, because we discussed it, not because it's not important, but if you were just looking at how you see the market, what are the things where you put in money right now, if you were to multiply that? What are the financially interesting opportunities you're seeing at the moment in whether it's the digital health market, or let's also include bioengineering or hardware or whatever? What are some of the technologies you find particularly interesting right now from more of a commercial perspective?
Anand should.
Who's the first one to jump?
I don't really know too much about this, but if I was to hazard a guess, I would say diagnostics generally, because of this drive towards precision medicine, and then diagnostics can be sort of digitally oriented. But that's what I would imagine. There's more money. I don't have a concrete answer, because this is, as you know, I'm the nerd in the group, so I do more research and reading than actual investing and working with businesses. But I would imagine that digital, I think probably, but it'll take some time because of the things mentioned here. But diagnostics, I think, are probably exploding. I mean, we're certainly spending a lot more on diagnostics in the UK than we were before. And this is even discounting the COVID-19 tests. We're spending a lot more on imaging. We're spending a lot more on lab tests because new lab tests are coming out all the time. And this drive towards, precision medicine and also defensive medicine practices because of litigation and all of these sorts of things. So I think that's just going to get bigger. And, there's so many different companies out on the market claiming to have the best digital radiology suites and solutions, AI-based and machine learning-based and quantum computing-based. Same thing for pathology as well, using pattern recognition. Their IBM was probably a starting point with Watson. Watson didn't succeed as they wished, but it was a starting point, at least in terms of how to think about these things. And they've kind of sliced and diced Watson into a variety of different solutions. And we actually did learn a lot from Watson as well, despite its failures in terms of what works and what doesn't work, and also how to think about these things. Philips, Toshiba, GE are creating these massive libraries of images and pathology things. So I don't know, I would just say diagnostics, but it's not an evidence-based conclusion. It's just based off of a hunch.
Maybe in the diagnostics, I also find the diagnostic space or getting earlier diagnostics quite interesting. And I think one particular field would be all these at-home tests that have been popping up, and not the ones that are more sort of in the consumer lifestyle area, but actually more in the serious health part. Because I think now with COVID, everyone has gotten very used to taking all these lateral flow tests themselves. So I think people are just really used to the concept of testing for certain things at home. And there are already so many technologies out there that allow at least parts of tests being brought to the patient at home. And I think that can really change diagnostics in the future.
Maybe one idea from my side. Hi, I'm Anja.
Hi, Anja.
I also linking to the things that have been said, I would actually go into personalization a lot as an investor, because I think we all know that we now have the technical abilities to personalize treatments, prevention, everything, because we know that every person is different. It's not just about men are different than women in all the health stuff, but also every person is different. So I think everything that scales this personalization. And then the other thing, which is also linked a lot with prevention and habits, is this motivational thing, because I think at the end, it's all about getting people motivated via an interesting journey, or even with game. I mean, I haven't thought through it, what kind of the metaverse will help people changing their behaviors in their real life as well, or all these Web3 ideas to really change the behavioral background of that. I think that would also be something that I don't have a clue now on details, but that is something I would definitely explore.
Yeah, absolutely agree, and we would also have mentioned that before. Annette, I think also some interesting points, but just what Laura said and what Anja said, the personalized approach is definitely super interesting and super hot right now. And just to give an example, and Laura had the same thought, we were so self-educated now that everybody can test themselves. Why can't we just like do swaps of different parts of our body now and really do that on a daily basis? I think that's a huge potential. And from the personalized aspect and combining those things, I think everything connected with microbiome was like huge. Not only like the gut microbiome, but there's the vaginal microbiome. There are a lot of things that have been published, super interesting papers recently from a very often like lab-based setting, but still I think that's a very big thing. And this again is linking to another topic, which is everything around food supplements, and maybe, for example, probiotics, because this is a huge market which is not really evidence-based, but I think also there we will see more and more knowledge. And and again, this whole food health, like food as medicine area, I think that's also super interesting. And again, food, of course, linking having a huge link to climate. So that's kind of the path I would see here. But then probably Annette, you can shoot now what your ideas are.
I would recommend nasal spray vaccination as a game changer. Invest in this topic because that makes the distribution quite easy worldwide. And the next thing I would recommend, mine's the Silicon Valley on technology. I see that the new vaccine is still ready, but due to regulation cannot be delivered in Europe because the EMA is too slow until May. And I presume there should be a new Silicon Valley, no Medical Valley, because there's a core of the new technology and there's a huge possibility with mRNA in treatment of cancer and personalized medicine.
Edouard.
Well, I think you've said it all. I mean, maybe one thing that is linked to the data paradigm shift that Anand was talking about, which is the middleware that is going to be able to kind of interoperate in between the different databases to make sure that, you know, like the information gets right from one direction to another. For example, in our case, when we want to get prescribed by our, you know, by a physician, you need to go on our dashboard and basically prescribe our application. I think that the one company that is going to come up with the equivalent of the App Store, but for, you know, digital application, digital diagnostic tool, and that is going to be integrated properly with EHR systems in general, is going to play a big role, and it's certainly going to get a bit like the App Store, you know, a big chunk of the cake. So in my opinion, if there's one company that there might not be one platform that is going to do everything, but those platforms definitely going to be very, very interesting and going to change the entire, you know, like digital adoption. So I would, you know, like besides at-home test, especially in ophthalmology and gaming, which is something that is obviously very interesting directly to me, I would say the middlewares, you know, that are going to be interoperating the data is very important.
I would agree with that. And actually that reminded me that, so the digital infrastructure with the data, the explosion of data is one thing. I think the other thing that I was mentioning before is cybersecurity. So that's going to be huge when you have all this personal data sort of floating around everywhere. So if I was to invest in someplace, I would probably invest in cybersecurity. And I think Israel has got like a half, 50% of cybersecurity investments worldwide. So you have a country there as well in terms of where to focus. But yeah, I think with all this data floating around, cybersecurity is going to be just a huge, huge issue.
If I may also, so what in economics, you always learn this concept of the difference between expressed preferences and revealed preferences. So what happens if you ask people and what is it where they actually put their money? And what I've been hearing a lot from investors is that they get so excited about this big vision of the healthcare system moving from reactive to proactive. And with that comes a lot of diagnostics, because being proactive means you need to have essentially three things. You need to have a sensor, i.e. diagnostics. You need to have an actor, i.e. Vaccines, whether nasal sprays or whether, whatever it might be, but something that allows you, in the beginning of COVID, we suddenly kind of got good at tracking where infections came, but we still didn't know what to do about it. And now we suddenly have vaccines, the therapies coming up, and so on and so on. So we were combining these. And then you also need the thing in between, which is what Edouard and Anand were just talking about, sort of like how do you connect the data from the sensors in an efficient and safe way to the actors, whatever the actors are. And that's where I see a lot of investors looking at. However, that's the express preference, right? The revealed preference in terms of where do people then actually put their money, whether they are investors or entrepreneurs. And I'm really sort of, in my mind, I have a couple of people that I admire because I think they're absolutely brilliant. But what I'm seeing is that they move away from this quite quickly. So you would have somebody who's developing this massive sensor, it's this implantable device that can give you real-time blood analysis or whatever they have. And at some point, most of them end up telling me, I discovered this new idea. I'm going to go into the consumer space. It's not regulated. I don't have to do a clinical trial. People pay much more. It's so cool, you know, all these athletes. And by the way, did you know the average salary, the average income of somebody who does an Ironman triathlon is 180,000. That's the brilliant early adopter. And then they get carried away into this. And I even know one investor who's made a lot of money in his life, has been really good at venture capital, has made some medtech investments. And he said, you know, I have scars. I have my medtech scars. And when I talked to him about an investment, he also said, actually, haven't you considered doing a consumer electronics thing in there out of this rather than the medtech thing? It could be more interesting. The opportunity is bigger and so on. So there is something where I think, and that's why I say it depends on who you are. If you're in the venture space as an investor or as an entrepreneur, often you are disincentivized to really try this because of course it's difficult in the first place, but then also you have these additional layers of regulation, of a difficulty fundraising, of a complicated reimbursement system, and DiGA is not making it much easier, etc., etc. But if you are a big medtech player, if you are Siemens Healthineers, you're more than happy to work on the next photon counting CT scanner, which came out last year, which is completely also, I would say it's also a paradigm shift, right? But and you're quite happy that you have all of these entry barriers. I'm not saying that about Siemens Healthineers. I know that they're very actively trying to help younger startups also get into the space. I don't want to be unfair, but essentially, if you are this entrenched player with all of these fortresses and these exclusive partnerships and whatever you have, they don't even have to be contractually exclusive, but once you're in there, it's really difficult to get somebody else in. Then it's easier to go for the big deep things that take very long. But my wish would be that we bring expressed and revealed preference a bit closer together, and that Europe would sort of have a closer look at how they could make that happen. And I think it takes a very, very comprehensive approach that requires talent upskilling, that requires different financial support for clinical research, and so on and so on and so on. And then these could become the technologies that are truly exportable, rather than an I don't know, sleeping app or something like that, which is tailored to a certain culture, a certain reimbursement system, and so on and so on. Yeah, Anand.
I guess a question for you based on this, very, very interesting. So if I understood this correctly, so, you know, are they targeting in the consumer market predominantly these athletes and the people? So is it a high margin, low volume type of game? Is that where they're targeting even within the consumer market, or are they going consumer generally?
I think it's the ideal audience of the Apple Watch carrier. So within this, you have the heavy early adopters, the self-optimizer kind of type, who are not in pain. Usually, you know, they might not have sleep disturbances or something, but they want to sleep better because they know it's, I don't know, improving their muscle recovery so they can do better workouts and so on. And their willingness to pay typically is pretty high, although there is not such a big pain. Also, they love these EEG meditation apps and whatever, and it's this whole, they love the sort of nutrition stuff and whatever, and books on it, and get excited about that. This is something where I often see the entrepreneurs end up with, because that's an early adopter case, and the rationale is, so going into the analog world, all of these trolleys that have been that are widely adopted now for air travel, you know, the Removas of the world, they actually started by building things for the air crews, and these are the power users, right? They travel so much, they need something that quickly fits in somewhere, can't be too big, has to have the essentials, has to be robust, has to be easy to move around and so on, and durable, blah blah blah. And once they built it for them and they made it really, really, really nice for them, they realized actually this is really nice for almost everybody who travels, and then it went to the broader market. And that's often the rationale that entrepreneurs take, which is finding the people who are most happy with something that's probably not perfect yet, but tries to solve a problem that they're seeing, or something that they really desire. They have more patience with you, and because they use it a lot, you become quicker aware of shortcomings of your solution. and then can move to a broader audience where it might even be too good for them, but that's okay then.
I mean, do you think this has the potential of being disruptive for healthcare generally, where now, we talk about, patient self-management, but individual self-management, and such that you actually, you're tackling the demand side rather than the supply side. So what we've been talking about is supply side, digital therapeutics, et cetera, for the healthcare marketplace. But here, if you look at the demand side, if you go directly consumers and you reduce the demand or the need for healthcare services in the first place, then would that automatically start shifting, insurance companies, for example, actually subsidizing some of these things directly by the consumer rather than needing to go through the intermediary of healthcare services, for example? I mean, it's maybe, it sounds a little bit far-fetched, but, like you say about the air trolleys, if enough people start adopting it and it becomes the norm, then people see, oh well, actually type 2 diabetes is caused by me not eating properly and not exercising enough, and actually I can just do that with this thing that I've just downloaded myself, and I don't need to go to the doctor. Therefore they are obsolete in that sense.
I wholeheartedly agree, and I also think actually this blurring of the lines goes in both directions. So another trend that I'm hearing a lot is that the startups in the healthcare space, they love to hire people from a finance or fintech background, and now also from a gaming background. Gamers have zero tolerance. If you lag a little bit, you might not get that headshot placed, and you lose. And so they get really frustrated. So the mouse has to be super optimized, everything has to be optimized sound. And that's where a lot of the people who look at what are the future trends, they like to look at what's happening in the gaming scene, for example, right? And same for fintech, right? It's a super regulated industry. People have disrupted it quite a lot, and taking some of their playbook lessons into the healthcare space is what's at the moment seen as a good strategy. So the whole topic of consumerization of healthcare means that healthcare moves into the consumer space, which is what you just, I think, outlined really nicely. And the other thing is the consumer space moving into healthcare by bringing in these different perspectives and thereby also changing how we deliver care. And I think gamification is something that we can use so much for behavior change and everything else. Also on the doctor side, right? So I see great potential there. We are coming to an end, unfortunately, if I'm not mistaken, DiGA, right? We have like 2 more minutes. And of course, you should have the final word. But if I could maybe ask everybody to just give like one statement of the one thing you think, if we should remember something from this session, what would be the singular most important thing that you would like all of us to take with us? Can I ask Anna to start with that?
Yeah, I knew that would be my first shot here. Yeah, so I think it was such a diverse discussion and maybe a little bit different than expected. I think it was really fruitful. Yeah, to just stress it because it's such an important topic, I would say there is really a huge potential in personalized prevention and prevention as a topic. And also we are really on a good way. I think we shouldn't focus so much on all the negatives, but there's been so much change and so much involvement, and that we really then now it's our from all of us the obligation to really keep the drive up and really also address the people which are now not addressed. Talking about digital divide, I think that's really of utmost importance, and that's not only patients or users, but also those who are really the players in the sector.
Edouard, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one thing that I would kind of emphasize is what Anand was saying, is that DiGA is just a means to an end, and the end is, you know, like the shift towards data-driven, you know, like healthcare. Now, how do we get there is for us to write, but we will get there eventually, and I think that this is when we are operating our startups, our medical centers, our healthcare system, we need to think about, you know, where it's heading and how it will change eventually the healthcare process of patients and the routine and the workflows of doctors. And only by doing that will we implement the right laws, will we implement the right system, and will we make European health system a reality. I mean, and digitalization of healthcare a reality. That's what I would say.
Laura.
I think personally, the word I'll take away from this the most is going to be overfitting. And I quite like that notion of making sure that whatever harmonization we'll see in terms of reimbursement in Germany, not to overfit it to each national way, but also maybe to the European way, but instead keeping it open for also more international adoption, making sure that we have a system in place here, we put a system in place here to make Europe an attractive market for digital health innovation, but making it open enough in terms of evidence requirements and so on to also allow the companies that bring these innovations to market to take them to even bigger markets, to even further markets, and have a big vision there.
Yeah, it was a super interesting discussion. Very well moderated, Sven. And you know, just listening to our fellow panelists and the frustrations. I suppose the frustrations, in a sense, are actually a good thing, because I mean, the takeaway for me is that this is pretty much an open canvas. We're kind of making the stuff up as we go along, and that really hit home. You know, when Sven brought up the point that, you know, the original versions of the DiGA regulation were pretty lax on evidence-based medicine. But there were frustrations and yells and screams from the community that actually drove that change to make it a little bit more reasonable. And I think these frustrations that are expressed in these sorts of platforms and venues, I think are essential so that we can design these regulations so that they're, you know, better and more fit for purpose. So I would say that it's an open canvas, and the uncertainties and the frustrations are actually necessary to design something that's better. So yeah, I'm hopeful to see what happens, because we have smart people raising the frustrations, so it's a good thing.
And DiGA, before I hand over to you, I just wanted to give the voice to people who shared something in the chat. Thank you for this. Azra, great to see you again. She writes, insurance companies in the US already subsidize and provide access to digital preventive products. Something I didn't know, something to maybe also look into more. Thanks for that note. And then Anya, love the word, health is the new wealth. And we need to make people aware and educate them so that they can make the right decisions, just as in the finance sector. So nice connection, again, fintech to everyone, where we had similar challenge of educating people, where it still is something that lacks indeed in the basic education system, and where the returns on invest can be dramatic if you give people the basic skills, and the same is true for health, that's for sure. So thank you for this as well. And now, DiGA, first of all, thank you from my behalf for making this all happen. Also, Anna, I know you have been involved in the planning, organizing of this. Thank you to all of the panelists for making the time and for sharing your insights. This was individually great, but I also think the setup and the combination of the speakers was quite precious. Thank you, everybody, for spending your evening here too. We all know lifetime is precious, and I'm very happy that you also shared some of your opinions from the audience. Don't be a stranger, please be in touch with everybody. And once more, thanks again. I took a lot from this and I appreciate it. So here's to DiGA.
Thank you, Sven. Actually, you said everything. I wanted to thank you especially for this fantastic moderation tonight. And thank you to all the speakers and audience. And I definitely I'm taking home a few cues about digital health, and I feel much smarter and educated on the topic. So maybe Anna, do you want to say a last word? And from our side, see you at our next advocacy seminar or webinar. And thank you for coming. Anna, do you want to say the last word?
I would say really nice. I saw a lot of people already getting connected, and I also really love that people put in ideas in the chat. And as you said, it's a lot of bringing different ideas together. Although when you are really familiar with the topic and the field, I definitely got a few aha moments as well. So great 1.5 hours well spent.
Super. Thank you so much. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot.